Hi everyone. In this video interview we're discussing the manifestation, the creation and nature of dimensional shifts. How this interview came about was quite a sequence of events that played out where within existence, with all parts participating in the process of equality and oneness, where we're all together, equal and one, walking our process of standing equal to and one with ourselves as everything, and simultaneously within that process, which is the primary point that we're facing, which is standing equal to and one with the physical and everything and all that the physical consists of and exists as, which has become, in essence, the total history, nature, substance, manifestation of the mind consciousness system and humanity as a whole, and which constitute our total separation in terms of what we as the interdimensions accepted and allowed ourselves to separate ourselves from. And now we're in the process of bringing it all back to self. And only recently, now within the interdimensions, we have, for an extensive period of time, worked with systems. Now, the systems, as you already know, with working with Desteni for quite some time, we explained as the mind consciousness system and the systems that the mind consciousness system create. And we as human beings create within the world system. You've got your education systems, your religious systems, your money systems, and then the systems within yourself is your personality systems, your reaction systems, your backchat systems. I mean, everything is a manifested system. And even within the interdimensions, systems exist within that context where we're constantly faced with the systems of existence. And only recently a realization opened up for those very systems, where a question was asked to them: why do you think you have not yet been deleted? And this was a particular question to the systems within the interdimensions, the very systems we interact with and with as this existence. Now, within the past, like long before we started becoming visible as Desteni within this world or on Earth, and through the writings and the videos, we walked a process through the portal for quite some time, where we first obviously cross-referenced all the communications, the beings, the processes, to make sure that what is being walked can be walked eternally and stand and is constant and consistent. So during that time of cross-referencing, of testing the actual realness of existence, of the portal, of everything and everyone participating within process, our approach, the beings within the interdimensions approach to systems, was to simply delete them. And within that deletion, the system would become non-existent. And I mean, even for a period of time, while we were walking our process through the portal and through the writings and through the videos, you may have noticed some videos that was done that's referred to as system removals, where the systems were removed, were deleted. So the very systems, as well as the interdimensions relationship towards the systems, was all that they were. They were just systems. And now that question had been asked to all the systems within existence, why do they think they had not yet been deleted? I mean, if they were just a system, the deletion would have been immediate. It could have been done in an instant, because we've proven that for quite a few years now already, wherein we simply deleted and removed systems and regarded them as only just that, because that is what they existed as in their very nature and manifestation and existence. And within that one question, we realized that we aren't just systems, that we're in fact beings, and that our relationship with everything and everyone was in the nature that it was in terms of instant deletion and removal, because that was the very existence that we lived, that we accepted and allowed. And within that accepted and allowed existence, that's what we were and remained as, and so accepted and allowed that nature of relationship where we were simply just removed or deleted. So this then brought through where we are now within this video interview, where we started realizing as an existence as a whole that everything is in fact a being, a living form, a living expression. And within that whatever we create that step forth or come forth from ourselves is in fact ourselves and instantly manifest as a part of ourselves. And we have previously interpreted or accepted and allowed the relationship towards our own creation as ourselves, in that we're simply creating systems, and those systems are just that, systems. And then the very systems that we created accepted and allowed ourselves as only just that, as only systems. We didn't accept and realize that with being within this very existence, we are an individual part of this existence as a whole, and therefore from being part of this existence, from extending and emerging from a very being, we are a being. So that point came through quite definitively, and within that we now recently, which was last night, had a interesting experience where we were all now within this new realization of, and especially for our systems, within this new realization that, okay, we're a being. I mean, we can actually participate equal and one with the beings of the interdimensions, within the context of not only accepting and allowing ourselves as systems and only functioning, existing, directing, and trying to change ourselves as systems, which was also quite an interesting realization, because we were all this time in participating in process as a whole, as the definition of ourselves as only systems, trying to and attempting to change ourselves to become life in being equal to and one with existence. But within that very starting point of accepting and allowing ourselves as just being a system, as just that, everything else that we do would be futile, because everything would be intoxicated with that initial starting point, and we'll try change ourselves as systems. But within that very point where we're stating, I'm trying to change myself as a system, I'm saying that I'm a system over and over and over and over again, just confirming, validating, and time looping my very starting point. And within changing that starting point in realizing, but hey, we are an individual, we're a being, and immediately changed our directive principle application to already now participating equal and one with what is here, as it is here, the interdimensions, the physical existence, and all other system beings that's here. And so we tested our applications in terms of, with this new starting point, working together with everything and everyone, in how we're walking our individual processes of standing equal and one with everything and everyone, which is the process of bringing everything back to self. And this is then again another point of how we're walking this is in firstly through self-forgiveness, where we have now, as existence as a whole, started a process in re-walking our process that we've walked throughout the years, because we've realized that our self-forgiveness and all the processes that we walked since the beginning, since the portal opened, where we walked our processes of equality and oneness, we walked it within the starting point of self-interest, and trying to get to or become something or someone, but only within our individual self-interested context of looking forward to certain experiences, a changed existence, specific relationships, and therefore our total entire process was walked within that starting point of what we accepted and allowed our individual selves to be in our definition, and therefore that manifested our total process into self-interest, instead of our starting point being the realization that we are an individual within existence as a whole, and thus my responsibility as that individual with existence as a whole is walking that which is best for all. And this is an interesting point that must be understood in terms of when looking at humanity as a whole on this earth, how what it is that we're walking at the moment as human beings is not individuality. We ourselves in the beginning of our processes believed that we're individuals, that's walking a process in becoming equal and one. And we have now realized that we in fact weren't individuals, because our very starting point was self-interest. And if your starting point is self-interest, you are separating yourself from your individuality. Individuality, which is in its pure, actual, manifested, formed expression, is being an individual as part of existence as a whole, in walking with everything and everyone that is individuals in itself. So this here is the redefinition of individuality, and how individuality does not exist within humanity, because if we have a look at human beings today, everything is self-interest driven. Within the very nature of how we participate in reality, we're participating in the polarity of competition, in constant, continuous games of superiority, inferiority, win and lose, which manifest our total living within absolute separation as survival. And therefore, within accepting and allowing ourselves to separate ourselves from that individuality, from being an individual walking with all individuals as manifested existence equal and one, we are in fact destroying individuality, which we've done within the interdimensions in the beginning and what is happening now within humanity. The individuality as the responsibility of each one as an individual within existence as a whole is being destroyed within our accepted and allowed separation of ourselves from our individuality, from that responsibility, into self-interest, where all we consider, regard, and care for is what we as a alone point want, need, and desire. And then accordingly we use and abuse other parts of ourselves to make sure that we succeed in our own self-interested pursuits of happiness, and therefore has manifested humanity as has manifested us in the interdimensions in the beginning of our processes into total absolute disagreement, where what is manifested within humanity is disagreement to the extent that no two human beings can have an effective, self-honest, equal and one relationship in having an agreement between two individuals that walk as two individuals and considering, regarding and caring for each other as actual individuals in assisting and supporting each other to grow, expand and reach their utmost potential of living expression. But instead, relationships has again become the context of secret, backchat, deception, hiding, where situations in constant, continuous conflict, and all that is happening within relationships at the moment is both trying or attempting to make sure that they don't lose each other. And within that, it creates internal conflict and creates alternate personalities in trying to maintain a relationship, in holding each other within only that domain that is referred to as relationship. And if one take it then into the global perspective, war, where the disagreement internally and between two human beings is extended externally between countries representing human beings, where there is constant, continuous disagreement to the extent where we would kill, murder, and violate each other, that are in fact equal and one from the same equal and one physical source substance of the earth, and that we have separated ourselves from our individuality as individuals existing here within this world as human beings to such an extent that it has manifested into a self-interest as ego, where everything is completely consumed within that living starting point. And within that self-interest, what happens is a constant, continuous conflict because of self-interest, because of everything and everyone having different contexts, manifestations, ideas, fantasies, beliefs that constitute that self-interest. There is constant, continuous conflict, disagreement. And that's why we have a total physical world, reality and humanity that is in constant conflict, disagreement, because we're not living here equal and one as the individuals that we are within and as human physical bodies, living in agreement within the starting point of what's best for all, because of the realization that as an individual, I am an individual with and as all, and therefore what I live is and must be naturally what is best for all, because all is me. And this is the exact same thing that happened in the interdimensions, where we, in the beginning, even took that point of self-interest through to the very process that we're walking of self-forgiveness, of writing. Yes, we even did writing in the interdimensions, and it's still a point that we utilize, meaning we have the ability to now and then sit down and write some words, because the very writing application is the very point where you can sit with yourself and see yourself before yourself structurally, practically, and maintains that assistance and support where you direct yourself in facing you and seeing you practically in front of yourself, so that there is really no denying, hiding, suppressing of what it is that you have become. And so we took our very point of interest as the separation of ourselves as our individuality into, through, and as our process of self-forgiveness, writing, self-corrective application, where instead of self-forgiveness being the process of bringing self back to self, giving self to self, which is what we're walking in existence. It's the process of equality and oneness. It's the process of bringing everything that we have separated ourselves from, which is everything and everyone in existence, the detail, the small, the big, the in, the out, the up, the down, the in-between. I mean, everything in existence is a part of ourselves, and we're in this process of standing equal to and one with everything and everyone of and as ourselves, so that we can assist and support ourselves in stopping the separation of interest and start walking as individuals within the actual living realization that we're equal and one with all individuals within existence, and so can accordingly adjust our living to what's best for all. So we compromised our process because our starting point was self-interest. So our self-forgiveness, our writing, our self-corrective application was within that context of interest. Because, for example, the self-forgiveness will be applied within the context of wanting to become someone, wanting to experience something, wanting to be seen as something more, something better, wanting to be better, wanting to be superior, wanting to portray and model a perfect being that resonate and everyone can see and be attracted to, and or even in terms of coming through and illustrating the change, the walking, the process, to save, to rescue, to help other beings and be this God. So it turned out into a total God complex. And through time in the interdimensions, I mean, from the beginning where we started with self-forgiveness up to now, all of this time, what was our primary point that we struggled with was working together. I mean, this is simply also illustrated within the nature of the relationship to the systems, that very point was not even yet realized until up to now, that the systems were in fact self. The systems were part of ourselves and thus were actual beings, and not just dead parts having no meaning, function, place or position within existence. That realization had not yet come through, that whatever we create is ourselves and is therefore part of ourselves, and being part of ourselves, and with self being a being that is a being equal and one. It's like giving birth to a baby. I mean, it's the exact same process. And thus, just as the baby is a creation of self, so is the systems that we created a creation of ourselves and the living being. And so through time, through all these years of walking, we came to this point now where we realized that we're not able to work together. And within that realization that we're not able to work together can only exist if self-interest exists. Self-interest creating the separation from individuality as the living manifestation of individuals standing together in agreement within the starting point living of what's best for all. So if there's disagreement in which shows within the result of not being able to work together, it obviously means that we're not standing as individuals. Our starting point is not what is best for all, but self-interest driven. And this opened up with last night, where we were facing dimensional shifts. And what happened was we were moving within a particular physical manifestation where quite a few of us come together in terms of taking on a point in the physical where we basically had to work together in terms of transcending this particular point in the physical. And the basic nature of that is in terms of standing equal to and one with the human physical body, the mind consciousness system, and being able to in fact stand equal to and one with that, because at the moment we have obviously accepted and allowed still that separation from the very manifestation of ourselves as the mind and the physical. And our experience was that we were working together. We're now working together to become equal and one with this part of ourselves as the mind and the physical. But the more and more we tried to work together, the more and more these dimensional shifts started manifesting. And it was interesting in terms of what these dimensional shifts looked like. And the more and more we started working together, so it was like we were literally standing together within the physical, and we were communicating and sharing and interacting within the context of now becoming equal and one with this physical and the mind consciousness system. But the more and more we started moving, shifting, changing, trying to align, trying to get into, trying to become, the more and more all together we manifested these dimensional shifts where we'd all together shift dimensions, where we literally feel like we're moving out of the physical into this alternate dimensional reality. And I don't know if you've seen a TV screen that goes in its sound, in where all the pixels shift. That was our experience, like us as the pixels shifting and moving, and we would completely remove ourselves from physical stability and go into these pixel shifts and become like these pixels shifting. And I mean, it happened over and over and over again. And all we did, we just kept saying to ourselves, let's work together. Let's work together. And the more and more we pushed, the more extensive these dimensional shifts became. And how it manifested was, we'd like be standing together in the physical, and we'd now be moving in aligning our beingness with the human physical body. And the moment we start that alignment of merging ourselves with the physical, that what would happen is we with the physical would start resonating. That resonance would manifest like a screen of like these resonance waves in front of us. And the moment that happens, we'd like be sucked into it, and then we'd be these resonance waves lost in these pixel distortions. And then we'd have to breathe, and as we would breathe everything, we'd slow everything and everyone down, and we'd position ourselves back into the physical. And with being within that situation, we again missed the obvious, that those very dimensional shifts was that very acceptance and allowance of our participation not being as individuals as what's best for all, but within the starting point of interest, and that we were in fact not working together. Because, I mean, if we were in fact working together as individuals within the starting point of what's best for all, our result as our feedback would obviously be entirely and totally different than the separation, creation, manifestation of the very existence of dimensional shift. Because the very dimensional shifts that we were creating were showing us that what we're doing is we're going into separation. Wake up, your starting point is separation. And within that, what proved that furthermore is that we didn't realize that those very dimensional shifts were in fact creations of ourselves, and thus not dimensional shifts as systems, but beings. And then we missed the obvious within the context of, if that is a part of me that I've now created in separation of me, to stand equal to and one with me is to bring the dimensional shift to me and bring it back to self, becoming equal to and one with self. I mean, that's what we've missed throughout creation, is that everything we created, we didn't realize to what extent it is in fact ourselves. And then what we did is, every time we created, and I mean this is from the beginning of existence, every time we created and constantly continued creating that very creation, because we didn't realize that's a part of ourselves, that's a being, that is me, we perpetuated the existence, the very manifestation and expression of separation. And now we're in this existence where everything is separate, to such an extent that we're even separate from our own thoughts. And within that we think, believe or perceive that, let's say in terms of that dimensional shift that we created, which was a being of ourselves, a part of ourselves, we think, believe and perceive that that part, because we're saying it's a system, that it is more than us. I mean, that we are more than it. That because we're saying it's a system, we're saying that we are more than that system, and that system is less than us because we've now defined it as a system. But that's not in fact so. That very moment, that total experience showed us that the dimensional shifts were in fact more than us, because the dimensional shifts that manifested constantly and continuously was the very creation of ourselves that was diminishing us because of that accepted and allowed point of separation. Because in going into separation with your very own creation, that is you, that is a part of you, does not diminish the creation, it diminishes you. And that was proven by that very point with the dimensional shifts. That the dimensional shifts was, we diminished ourselves in the face of it, because the more and more and more we tried to work together, we tried to align ourselves into that equality and oneness, the more and more we just fucked ourselves over and over and over again, to the point which it took us to just stopping everything, where we could do nothing because we didn't know what else to do. And therefore everything that we could do, that we had an opportunity to do together as standing as individuals in what's best for all, was completely gone. Because we've diminished ourselves to nothing because of just that point of separation, of not realizing that the dimensional shifts were in fact ourselves. Within that also then proved the point of our self-forgiveness within the very beginning of our process, that was not done within the actual real context of bringing self back to self. Self-forgiveness in its pure natural actuality in the context of standing as an individual within the realization that I'm at the moment separate from all of me as everything that is individual manifestations of an as me equal in one. So I must assist and support myself to bring all that is me as individuals back to me as the individual here, to in fact rebirth myself and stand as and be equal to and one with all individual parts of me as existence. That's self-forgiveness. You're bringing self back to self. You're giving self to self. It is a giving. As you bring everything back to yourself, you're giving yourself back to yourself. So we did obviously not walk self-forgiveness within that context, because if we did, we wouldn't have accepted and allowed this very separation of this very point of creation of the dimensional shifts, in seeing it now again as a system instead of realizing that it's an individual part of ourselves and thus a being, and thus we must bring it back to self. And with that not manifesting, but us continuously separating ourselves from the dimensional shifts, we're showing that our self-forgiveness was done in interest and never done for real after all these years. So we're now walking our self-forgiveness process again. We're actually restarting our whole process again, where we're now walking ourselves within this starting point as individuals, in being an individual within existence as a whole, in the realization of the process of bringing everything back to self, in giving self to self. And I mean, we walked this as well within the interdimensions throughout process, where we would take parts of ourselves and place it within ourselves, and then it would become self equal in one. But we didn't do the 1 + 1 + 1 equality equation, which again you can bring back to our total process thus far, and now with this event that happened with the dimensional shifts, where we didn't put 1 + 1 + 1 together within the context of, we weren't 1 + 1s + 1s actually walking as one individual, equal and one as a starting point of what's best for all, where what then would have manifested is us being able to in fact work together. And obviously the results of our working together would not be what it has been, which was disagreement, conflict, separation. And thus our 1 + 1s were actually 1 + 1 equals separation, disagreement, conflict, and we were in this total illusion of we're working together. But again, that was simply an illusion in itself, because if we were working together, our results would have shown 1 + 1 equals what is best for all. And throughout our process, it obviously hadn't been what is best for all, because there had been no definitive, impactful, real change within our total relationship with ourselves and everything and everyone, shown within the very point of our relationship with the systems. And the systems themselves as well. I mean, their very point of, for example, our very point of interest was becoming equal in one with beings, wanting to be a being. And that in itself was a point of interest in wanting to become something just for me, just for self, instead of considering the individuality of what is best for all, and being an individual equal in one with everything and everyone, just in that realization that I'm already here, and within being here I am an individual, and that point of individuality is my responsibility of and with all individuals as me as existence. But instead we went into interest thus separation, and thus disagreement with ourselves as our individuality, and so with everything else as all individuals, and went into total self-separation, and so manifested that very separation based on the very relationships that the interdimensions had with the systems. And then we get into where humanity is at the moment in terms of dimensional shifts. Dimensional shifts is the very manifestation of our relationship toward something or someone that is within the context of interest because of separation, and that manifests a dimensional shift as a disagreement, because what happens is, in accepting and allowing ourselves to have that relationship with another human being with an interest, and one can have a look at self-honestly, one's thoughts, one's backchats, one's internal conversations. Your relationship with other human beings is self-interest driven. It's self-interest within the nature of competition, where we always try and be and become better, more than, and superior to something or someone else. And we're only pursuing our own happiness, our own wants, needs, and desires. I mean, if this was not so, then we as human beings would have lived within a principle of what's best for all. We'd actually have agreement. There would be no internal or external conflict. There wouldn't be poverty. There wouldn't be war. There wouldn't be starvation. There wouldn't be violence, because we're all in agreement as individuals, walking what's best for all. With everything existing as it does, war, violence, poverty, starvation, is indicating interest. I mean, those with money in this world is only accepting and allowing their individual interests in pursuing their own individual pursuit of happiness, in making sure only their self-interested personal lives are taken care of and cared for, no matter that almost half the world is in poverty in the process of starving. So this very point of how we are shifting in dimensions through accepting and allowing ourselves to live with an interest, and so shifting ourselves into mind dimensions and alternate realities in our mind consciousness systems, shifting ourselves into a alternate reality, which is the exact same that happened with us in the interdimensions. We shifted ourselves out of the physical equality and oneness in being individuals equal and one within our physical positions, and shifted ourselves into dimensional shifts, where within and as those dimensional shifts we separated ourselves from ourselves as our physical equality oneness, and we separated ourselves from each other. And this is the exact same that's happening in humanity. We are living a dimensional shift. We are the living dimensional shift within ourselves as the mind consciousness system. But yet again, what must be realized is that very dimensional shift that we've become within our mind consciousness system, where we've shifted into our alternate mind realities of self-interest as our personalities, within which and as which we're maintaining and pursuing our own individual pursuits of happiness, and only considering regarding ourselves and our own lives, that very dimensional shift is what the mind consciousness system is and has become. And because we are the ones shifting ourselves into that dimensional shifts as alternate mind realities, as the personalities we've manifested within that, it is in fact who? Ourselves. The mind is self. The mind is a being. It is you. That's why we, for example, have actual internal conversations going on inside our mind consciousness systems. Each and every single human being is experiencing that, where you can talk to yourself in your own mind and your mind will talk back, which is indicating that your mind is a being, your mind is you. And this is where the process of self-forgiveness comes in, is realizing that your mind is not just a system. if this is what we'd like to bring forth within our processes throughout heaven, is this. Realize that your mind consciousness system is not just a system. It is a being, and it is you. It is not your enemy. It is not bad. It is not good. It is you as what you have created as your manifested self-separation. And therefore, it is self. And within that realization, one must see, realize, and understand that one's mind consciousness system as an actual being, as self, is showing, exposing, and revealing self to self. Because it is self, as a part of self, it's obviously self in the totality of what self is. We've always been creating ourselves. And therefore, what is this total existence? Is ourselves. Because we've always constantly and continuously created ourselves over and over and over again. And thus why this is existence is in fact self. Not just a system. It is actual living beings. And I mean, through the portal it has been proven that you can speak to everything and anything. It's beings. And we're all in this process together as existence, facing the exact same point, bringing self back to self. So, with walking your mind consciousness system, realize that it is you beginning your process of bringing self back to self, of giving self to self. And that is walked through self-forgiveness, but not within the context of self-interest, as what we've been walking throughout this time, but within the context of the starting point principle of what's best for all within equality and oneness. So what we would suggest doing in terms of your walking of your self-forgiveness, of bringing yourself back to yourself as your mind consciousness system, as yourself, where you're taking individual parts of yourself as your mind consciousness system and standing equal to and one with it through your walking of self-forgiveness. Because what are you doing in self-forgiveness? When you're walking self-forgiveness, you are in fact forgiving yourself as the individual that you've separated yourself from separating yourself from all and everything as yourself. And within that forgiving, what you're doing is you're taking self-responsibility for that separation. In taking self-responsibility, you're making the statement as the living realization that this part is in fact me. And within that realization of me-ness, that it is me, you are bringing it back to self. And therefore, self-forgiveness walked within that starting point of bringing self back to self, of giving self to self, is the only process, the only way of standing and being equal to and one with self. Of actually putting that thought, that reaction, that personality into and as self, bringing it here and taking that responsibility and manifesting that realization of this is a part of me, this is me. And only then can one move within the process of self-corrective application, where you thus become the living change of that part of you as you, and live that change within the starting point of individuality as an individual that is living within what is best for all, equal and one. And this is the process of how we walk to assist and support ourselves, to bring ourselves back to self as what we've separated ourselves from within existence, and to change ourselves into a starting point living as the living example of being an individual within existence as a whole, and that individual as ourselves taking that point of self-responsibility in changing our very living to a living individual within and as what's best for all, equal and one. So this is the very process that we're now walking in the interdimensions, where we've realized, okay, with the feedback of those and such dimensional shifts, that all this time our self-forgiveness was in self-interest. We didn't bring all the parts of ourselves back to ourselves, in standing equal to and one with parts of ourselves. I mean, God, it showed with our relationship with the systems. We weren't equal and one with our very own creation as the systems. With the very point here that we're not equal and one with the physical. We hadn't brought ourselves as the physical back to ourselves equal and one. And within that, we have applied self-forgiveness and self-interest, which perpetuated self-interest, because that showed within the very context that we haven't been able to work together. There was disagreement, there was conflict, and there was separation. And within that, manifested ourselves into dimensional shifts, which perpetuated the actual point of separation, and which obviously led us into the total manifested point of everything that we accepted and allowed that happened in that one moment of dimensional shifts that showed our total process that has been walked thus far and having to start over again. So what we do have is the blueprints of what we've walked thus far. So we've got direction, we've got a platform, we know what to do, and now it's just a matter of walking it, which we're doing. And we're grateful because this is quite an awesome point to realize in that importance of starting point, and that we've got to assert ourselves as individuals, starting point, what's best for all, and not accept and allow us to go into self-interest, which within ourselves shift us into interest. Within that shift, separate ourselves from individuality, from equality and oneness, from being an individual as part of and as everything and everyone else, and then within that very interest, manifest ourselves in disagreement with ourselves as all as one is equal. In that disagreement, creating conflict, within conflict, creating separation, within separation, creating consequence, within consequence, creating time loops, and we are stuck in that total manifested dimensional shift, in which we then superimpose our experience of interest onto the experience of existence as a whole, and then we're trying to walk our process within that total separation, and it just manifests a fuck up for ourselves and everything and everyone else as well, because you compromise yourself, you compromise everything and everyone. And I mean, this is shown now, because we've all accepted and allowed this point of interest. We did not only compromise ourselves, we compromised ourselves and everyone and everything else participating, where we are at the point where we couldn't work together. We were in total separation, disagreement, conflict. And now we get to, for example, the equal and one process within humanity. So understand that it's now not necessary for you to go through years of realizing this point. When you're starting your process, and if you already started, simply breathe and walk now the continuation of your process from this moment forth, within the starting point of an individual, walking a starting point of what's best for all, in bringing me back to myself as all parts of me. And that process starts with me as my mind consciousness system, as what is me at the moment that I've separated myself from. And I walk self-forgiveness as I forgive myself that I've accepted and allowed myself, as the living statement of me realizing that I've separated myself from myself. And within that realization of separation, I take responsibility for that separation, and I stand equal to and one with that part of me, so that within that equality and oneness, I have the power, the ability, and the responsibility to change my living starting point in being the directive principle of what's best for all, as a living example of an individual that is walking its process of equality and oneness. So understand that the context of what this entire world now consists of and exists as is because of our very manifested dimensional shift that we've become, that is the mind consciousness system, that is ourselves as a living being that we have become, and that living being manifested in various other different living beings as our thoughts, internal conversations, backchat, personalities, reactions, habits, behaviors, patterns, constructs, systems. Everything is a being within, it's like a dimensional shift within a dimensional shift within a dimensional shift. And within that we have, because of and due to interest of my own wants, needs, and desires, have gone into separation from individuality, separation from everything and everyone else. Within that separation manifested what within ourselves? Disagreement, because we're now in disagreement with ourselves as an individual, as everything and everyone. We're manifesting ourselves into what? Separation. Separation equals conflict. From that conflict we've manifested more separation and disagreement, and that's what this whole existence has become: separation, disagreement, and conflict, where we cannot even agree within ourselves. If you have a look at your internal conversations you're having, how often you're having a back and forth with yourself as this voice in your head, as a being communicating with you that you're fighting with. I mean, we have become disagreement as separation, as interest from the individual of what's best for all, as equality and oneness, to such an extent that we cannot even work together with ourselves, inside ourselves, with our thoughts and our internal conversations and our backchats and reactions. So therefore, in terms of process, you've got to start with who? Yourself. I mean, we are the individuals that have separated ourselves from ourselves as individuals, and so from everything and everyone else as ourselves. And therefore the process starts within yourself. So you start your process in walking, standing equal to and one with your thoughts, your reactions, your personalities, your backchat, your internal conversations, your everything that's within yourself. And one walk that process through your self-forgiveness and your writing and your self-corrective application, and how we've explained how self-forgiveness and writing and self-corrective application work, and bringing self back to self, getting self to self. Your thoughts, everything is a being. You must realize that that is a part of you, and take responsibility for it and change it into bringing it here and living it as a principle of what's best for all, equal and one. So we're walking the process out of ego and self-interest into individuals living what's best for all, so that we accumulate ourselves within the equality equation as 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals what's best for all, instead of 1 plus 1 equals disagreement, conflict, and separation. Which is what the very nature of relationships has become in this existence. If one have a look at relationships, and we mentioned a bit of it just a moment ago, in how what relationships become is competition, ego, survival, conflict, deception, secrets, lies, If one realize, understand the extent to which one has to compromise within relationships to make sure that both keep each other in where what is only considered and regarded is these two individuals in their relationship cocoon, and is thus a total representation of the absolute nature of separation that we're within, because the two in this relationship goes into absolute isolation from everything and everyone else within existence, where they're just trying to maintain, save, and experience only that relationship, and they become totally possessed within only that relationship. And if one have a look at what we are presenting with destiny is agreements, where it becomes two individuals assisting and supporting themselves within their self-agreement. Obviously, where does agreement start? With yourself. You are within your self-forgiveness, you're writing your self-corrective application, walking a self-agreement, so that I can be in agreement with my own self in my very living of what is best for all, equal and one. And therefore I'm always in self-agreement, because I know what I'm walking is in fact best for all. At the moment, we're not in self-agreement. We're in separation, disagreement, and conflict. And therefore the process of self-forgiveness, self-corrective application, and writing is that process of establishing a self-agreement, stopping the disagreement, conflict, and separation within self. And therefore agreement within what we propose as destiny is two individuals walking their individual self-agreements of becoming individuals, equal and one with and as all of existence. And as the individuals are assisting and supporting themselves with their individual process, they assist and support each other to become individuals, living what's best for all, equal and one, so that as individuals, they can become examples for other individuals in this world, in this reality and existence, to show what an individual living what's best for all, equal and one, really in fact is and mean. And within this, within establishing agreements, we then reconstitute the total nature of what relationships has become in this world, in this reality, where internally it has become separation, disagreement, and conflict. Externally it's become separation, disagreement, and conflict, where everything and everyone only lives within that context, and that's been our relationship with ourselves, with everything and everyone. So within walking the self-agreement and agreement with another transforms that total internal and external acceptance and allowance of what we've lived from internal conflict, disagreement, and separation to internal self-agreement in standing and living what's best for all, equal and one. And then from external conflict, disagreement, and separation, we now walk with another being in agreement, equal and one. And that's why the key to changing existence is relationship and sex, interestingly enough, where through self-agreement and or agreement with another, we change ourselves and so change existence, because everything exists as what? Relationships. We have a relationship with every single part of ourselves as this existence. At the moment, that relationships exist as separation, disagreement, and conflict. And we've got to change our total relationship with existence to the agreement of equality and oneness. Now, we're not saying go find an agreement because that's your only salvation, or go have sex because that's the only way you're going to make progress. No. We're simply showing you that how the nature of relationships will change through the nature of agreements. And that whether you're in agreement with another or self-agreement, it is exactly the same. You still walk what? The primary process, which is your self-agreement to individual best for all. With walking it with another, it's simply that you're walking it with another human being, but your primary process remains the same, your self-agreement. And then if and as an opportunity open up in walking this with another human being, great. However, if you're not yet at this stage walking with another human being, don't go and chase after relationships and sex. This is not how things work. I mean, sex and sexuality is going to completely transform within the nature of agreements. And with Destiny, there is an agreement course coming up soon that take human beings out of the whole relationship system, out of disagreement, conflict and separation, into self-agreement and agreement with another, in walking the individual principle of what's best for all, in equality and oneness, and bringing self back to self, and in fact being able to walk with another. And so we start changing ourselves and humanity as a whole, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, in manifesting agreements that stand eternal, and so will change existence as a whole. So for those in relationships at the moment, for whoever is listening to this video interview, and to each one and all that is hearing, consider this in seeing how we have separated ourselves into interest, and so manifested disagreement, and within that disagreement manifested conflict, which has perpetuated, manifested, created this total existence, and that we've never realized, seen and understood that creation is in fact ourselves, from inside to outside, up and down, and in between. So as we've walked our process throughout the years, this is the gift we give to you as ourselves, to align your starting point with what's best for all, because we're saying to you as me that you don't require walking all these years to realize what we've realized now. You can simply assert yourself, change yourself, direct yourself to walk equal to and one with us in walking that process of becoming an individual, living what's best for all in equality and oneness, and walking that with self-forgiveness, writing, and self-corrective application. And there are interviews available in how to walk self-forgiveness, writing, and self-corrective application in the eQuaf store that one can invest in, that is a life-changing product that remains with you eternally. Another point that we'd like to bring in within what we have discussed thus far within our process, in how we've realized that we've manifested ourselves into a living starting point of self-interest, and within that self-interest separated ourselves from being an individual equal to and one with all individuals that is manifested within and as this existence, that are beings of and as ourselves, as part of and as our creation. And within that self-separation of interest, we manifested thus a disagreement within the agreement of equality and oneness with and as all individuals. Within that disagreement manifested internal conflict within ourselves, in how it is that we always within our interest want to be more, want to be better, want to be superior, and so lived out that internal conflict with everything and everyone else within existence, and so manifested external conflict, external disagreement, and external separation, and thus within that hampered our process of being able to work together in assisting and supporting ourselves and each other to become equal to and one with ourselves, which is the process of bringing everything back to self. And because we compromised ourselves within the very point that assists and support this process as self-forgiveness, everything else became futile, became completely irrelevant, because our very living was not within the context of an individual living as what's best for all. And within that entire process, what was extensively affected was the point of communication, where we did not in fact communicate with each other, in fact facilitating each other's processes in understanding, considering and regarding where each one is within their individual process, what it is that they're facing, what it is that they're experiencing, who they are within the totality of themselves. And within that point of self-separation within ourselves, most of the communication happened within the context of backchat and internal conversations, where we would, instead of assisting and supporting another being, approach that being within that very nature and starting point of self-interest in wanting ourselves to be more, to be better or superior, in wanting to pursue our own happiness, in manifesting or getting to or experiencing a purpose only in relation to ourselves, our interests, and our own personal wants, needs, and desires. And within that, the obvious manifested consequence is that communication is not effective. And if communication is not effective, there is no community, no group of equal and one beings actually walking within assistance and support within the context of what's best for all, equal and one. And because we haven't had that actual real communication, it furthermore perpetuated and accumulated that very manifestation of ourselves and together in not being able to work together. And within that, we compromised our own individual process as well as everyone that has been walking together in this process. So there was a togetherness, but a togetherness of interests, and the manifested consequence of that brought us to this point of facing ourselves in the physical together, but instead of it being a process of transcendence, of merging and standing equal to and one with ourselves as the physical, in being the physical, in realizing that the physical is me as a being, as part of me, it became a point where we instead manifested ourselves into a dimensional shift over and over and over again, hitting our heads on the same point that was playing out in creating these dimensional shifts, to the extent that because of that separation from our own creation as dimensional shifts, diminished ourselves to the extent where we could do nothing. And we often, within that experience of believing that we can't do anything, it's useless, it's worthless, we fucked up, it's the end, we failed, instead of realizing that that whole experience is in fact a manipulation, as a outburst or a tantrum that one is throwing to try and manipulate your external environment in somehow feeling sorry for you, to help you out of the very situation that you created yourself, just because of that accepted and allowed point of separating ourselves from our own creations, and within that separation diminishing ourselves into inferiority and less than, which is the polarity opposite again of what we initially wanted, which was superiority, more than, being better than. And so we constantly and continuously moved ourselves and shifted ourselves within our own internal and external polarities of being more than, superior than, getting somewhere, getting something done, but then falling into the alternate polarity, which was diminishing, limiting, less than. And I mean, when we took this and we looked at our total process from the beginning, we realized this was also a prominent point within the totality of our process, where we'd balance ourselves between these two polarities over and over again, and not asking the common sense question of, and the self-honesty of having a look at the real reality and nature of our total process, in seeing, realizing, and understanding what it is that we've been accepting and allowing as individuals and together. And one can have a look at this within humanity as a whole as well, and where communication is primarily manifested or happening is within our own minds, where in terms of approaching another human being, there is immediate backchat, internal conversations, thoughts that emerge within ourselves, and the communication with another human being is thus more within the context of asserting a particular personality, a particular portrayal. And that very personality and portrayal, because the very starting point is self-interest, is just that, within the context of how we participate through and as ego in our world and reality. We don't, in fact, communicate in getting to know the actual being that we're interacting with. And that perpetuates yet again the internal conflict, the external conflict, and constant continuous disagreement. And that is also prevalent within relationships, where how much of one's communication is in fact only within the context of interest in one's backchat, thoughts, and internal conversations, and not communicating or getting to know the actual being. And within that communication, understanding, considering, and regarding who that being is in the totality that came about in manifesting this being as who they are, and within that getting to know them intimately, being able to share perspective, share understanding, share insights in actually assisting and supporting this being within what it is that they're experiencing. But instead, we've become these beings that constantly, continuously perpetuate internal and external conflict, because we have become that very living manifestation of conflict in how we have created the disagreement between ourselves and who we are as individuals, equal to and one with everything and everyone else. And simply because we're not accepting and allowing ourselves to face the real nature of ourselves within ourselves, we're constantly and continuously trying to and attempting to sabotage our relationships, other human beings, our world, and our reality in a starting point approach of using and abusing them for one's own hidden agendas. And if one have a look from the context of individual relationships and taking it to the world as a whole, countries are having wars against each other. There is no communication. It's like the government would be the manifestation of the backchat, the internal conversations, as the manifestation of the secret mind. And you've even got your secret services and that's involved in spying and investigating different countries, and then from that backdrop emerges this beast, that this demon, as the very countries that then war and fight and attack each other, which is the exact equal and one nature of what's in fact happening within our own minds as individuals. We're creating ourselves as these demonic forces that in fact attack each other in our own minds through having this backchat, this internal conversations within our secret mind towards them. Yet we put a smile on our faces, making as though everything is okay. But the real raw nature of what's going on inside ourselves is darkness. And we are so afraid of facing this within ourselves that we've constantly and continuously tried and attempted to run away from it over and over and over again. However, if one have a look at our process within the interdimensions, there was this play out that manifested, that became an actual creation in front of us in a moment, and there was simply no denying what it is that we were accepting and allowing to be, live and do as individuals and together. And this is the same that's happening in this world. I mean, everything that is manifesting in this existence is in fact parts of ourselves, and we have for aeons of time feared to face these parts within ourselves. And within that very resistance of what we fear, we have suppressed it. But suppression does not mean it becomes non-existent. And now it has come to the stage and the era of humanity where everything that we feared, everything that we've suppressed, everything that we've hidden from is starting to emerge and come to the fore, and with quite a velocity. So one can even start looking at one's individual process and how you'll start realizing how much more faster your thoughts are moving, how much more intense your backchat is coming, how much more difficult it is becoming to take control of your internal reactions. It's like everything is becoming more and more and more intense. It is simply showing and revealing to you that you need to face this within yourself. You need to confront it. You need to understand it as yourself, because it is you emerging within yourself saying, hey, this is you. You need to pay attention to it. You need to direct it. You need to face it. You need to become it to be able to change it. So the only key in doing that is your self-forgiveness and your writing and your self-corrective application. So in terms of self-forgiveness and writing, this and through this you establish your self-communication. Because to be able to communicate effectively with another human being in getting to know who they really are within the totality of themselves, to be able to, within that intimacy through communication, be able to understand, consider and regard them within equality and oneness, in how to assist and support them equal to and one with how self is or has assisted and supported self. So the key to expand one's process in terms of, in fact, getting to know another human being intimately, equal and one, is to assist and support self within one's self process of self-communication, in where you get to know yourself. In that getting to know yourself is the very process of standing equal to and one with self, of bringing self back to self as all the parts that is existent within self. And that is your process of self-forgiveness, writing and self-corrective application, where you are in fact communicating with you in writing yourself out. You are writing with yourself. You are communicating with yourself. You are in that nature of what communication is a getting to know within equality and oneness. Because in communicating with other human beings, what is it that you'd be doing in terms of real communication? Is you're walking practically through communication, that process of being intimate with another human being as yourself. And this process of communication as getting to know another as self and getting to know self in equality and oneness is most effectively lived within the process of agreements, where you intimately walk with another human being as yourself, and it facilitates that process of communication so effectively because you can practically walk with another human being in expanding yourself within that process of intimacy and equality and oneness. Obviously, it's not that it can only exist within agreement. Remember, we said self-agreement first. You establish your self-communication first. I mean, it would be so much more effective and easier, directive and simpler for yourself to, if you're not yet in agreement, first prepare yourself effectively. Establish your self-agreement, absolutely. Establish your self-communication, where your self-agreement is how you are coming into agreement as equality and oneness with and as all parts of you within yourself as your mind consciousness system. And then your self-communication, where you are facilitating that process of getting to know you as standing equal to and one with all those parts of you. And how much more fun it'll be walking that with another human being when you are in fact prepared. Because you will then walk that being equal to and one with how you have walked yourself. And if you are in an agreement or a relationship, one can assist and support oneself within this context. If you are in a relationship where two Destonians are walking, facilitate your individual process as the male and the female, or the two human beings as individuals. Assist and support you within that process of establishing your individual self-agreements, your individual self-communications, and then assist and support each other while you're interacting with each other, that when you are communicating, that you stop the back chat and the internal conversations that come up within your mind, and make sure that within direct communication you are in fact looking them in the eye, that you are able to see them as you see yourself. It's like really being here with them and communicating with them and each other directly. Because obviously with, for example, not being able to face each other directly in the eyes, there are some internal uncomfortabilities that manifest that has not yet been considered, looked at, or faced. And then first assist and support self in having a look at why it is that one cannot look one's partner in the eye. What is it that one is going through or experiencing, and make sure that your communication with your partner is comfortable, that you guys can, for example, lie in the bed or sit in the lounge, or when you go out, you're comfortable, you communicate with each other directly. And within that process, that there's no back chat or internal conversations or thoughts coming up before you communicate. Because otherwise, again, that's not communication. You're accepting and allowing yourself to go into self-interest, which takes you to ego, which takes you to your internal conflict and your separation from yourself and from another. And it's going to take time, practice, and application. So really be patient with yourself and each other. And then if you are in a relationship where you're the only one walking this process, then you walk your process in the context of your own self-agreement, your own self-communication. And again, here we're emphasizing the tendency of wanting to try and change another or enforce change or demand change when self is in fact not changed. That nature of desiring, wanting, needing another to change is simply projecting a back door for oneself to not face oneself, but projecting change onto another when self has not in fact walked that for self yet. So rather than become a living example for your partner and first initially only walk for you in your self-agreement, your self-communication, and then maybe eventually you can, through time, slowly but surely, introduce your partner to considering a different way of life that regard not only interest but best for all as equality and oneness. And one can already now see that within starting this process within yourself and with others, and I mean you can expand it through to all human beings that you communicate with. Practice that application of stopping your back chat, your thoughts, your internal conversations, and when you're communicating with another human being, actually listen and hear what it is that they're saying. I mean, very often we jump to conclusions and see and experience of them what we want to see and experience, and that want leads us again into interest, ego, disagreement, separation, and conflict. So this is a important point for everyone walking process, and for those listening to this video interview for the first time, to consider in stopping that perpetuation of interest, disagreement, and conflict within ourselves that is currently reflected within how this total existence is manifested, where because we as individuals have separated ourselves from our individuality, from standing equal to and one with all individuals as everything and everyone within this existence, how we have disregarded and are now close to destroying this actual real physical reality. Nature, the animal kingdom, the earth, the insects, the bugs, the water, that we have completely neglected because we've all been participating in our internal dimensional shift as our total mind consciousness system that we are, in only living for our own interests, and in that created a total disagreement, separation, and conflict with what is real, with the physical and everything that is in fact physical. So one can start seeing within the interviews that we've done, within this interview that we've done, is how this point of us accepting and allowing ourselves to separate ourselves into interests has manifested our total experience within this total existence, and that the key, yet again, is who? Ourselves. And when start that process with walking self-agreement and self-communication, so that we can get communication real and effective within this existence, and start communicating for the first time. Because if one have a look at one's total life experience, you've never really communicated with another human being. It has always been your own interest stepping forth into a manifestation of personality to pursue your own happiness within the context of a moment, and that you were and have always been relating to your own mind. You've never really related, connected, communicated, or even heard another human being. So it's time to hear yourself, and you, as your mind has been speaking to you for a very long time, which is your whole life thus far, in the very thoughts, as the reactions, as the personalities, as the backchats, as the internal conversations, been saying to you that this is what you are, this is what needs attention. And it's going to intensify and accumulate, because it's saying, hey, this is you, stand up, hear, listen, see, direct. And maybe that's, if one have a look at this world and this existence, we're not in fact hearing as in understanding, as in seeing, as in considering what's been happening to this physical reality, to the countless amount of human beings that are suffering, animals, the earth, nature, water, all of it, beings, actual living beings that one can directly communicate with, but we haven't been able to because we haven't been hearing, we haven't been seeing, we haven't been here. So assist and support oneself to get here, to become equal to and one with self, as what self exists as this existence. Get into the real world that is this physical reality, that and what it has become, so that in that equality and oneness we can change it. Alright, so this is a point in terms of how we assist and support ourselves through self-agreement, self-communication, to establish equality and oneness with ourselves as individuals, and individuals as ourselves as others. Thank you very much.